We're thrilled to have welcomed our first grandbaby recently. But growing this precious human hasn't been easy on our daughter. The unrelenting pregnancy fatigue really took it out of her.
One thing that helped was keeping her fluids up, and she loved Rehydrate. Rehydrate is an essential electrolyte drink made by some great guys right here in Brizzy. It's safe during pregnancy and breastfeeding and is like a magical little energy and hydration boost for mum and bub.
If you're growing a little human or are just feeling a little run down, grab some at Coles today.
It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
So here's the thing. If you don't understand what happened in class, to come home and have to try to work it out without the teacher, that can be overwhelming.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Hello, this is a very nervous Dr. Justin Coulson, the author of 6 books about raising happy families.
Why are you nervous?
Oh, just because I know what we're talking about today, and this is one of those topics that is provocative and it gets people on edge. I'm here with my wife and co-host, Mrs. Happy Families, Kylie, and today
we're talking about homework.
Homework that I despise, homework that I think children just shouldn't be doing, homework that I have very strong opinions about. Ask me what I really think.
You do have very strong opinions about this, and we differ a little bit.
From time to time, we've
this.
had our moments on this, haven't we?
Yeah. So can you just tell me what is the theory behind giving our kids homework? I mean, literally from the time our kids hit prep, they're coming home with stuff that they have to achieve at home.
Yeah, they are.
So what's the ideal behind it?
Well, this is really interesting because homework has just always been a thing. Well, one day it became a thing at least, and that's kind of what we've always done since. And nobody really researched whether homework was helpful or not for decades and decades after it started. But the theory is there's work that you've got to get done, and we want to make sure that we're consolidating learning. So we're going to send it home so the kids can, do an extra shift, do some overtime when you get home, kids. We're not going to pay you for it, but let's get you to do some overtime. And the idea is let's consolidate the learning. Let's make sure that you're not falling behind in class. It's that kind of thing.
Well, I grew up watching Little House on the Prairie, and they used to go to school every day. They didn't go home with homework.
No, in the olden days they didn't. And then someone obviously had the idea that sometimes if you don't finish your work at school, you need to take it home and finish it. And someone else had an idea that we need to make sure that you don't forget the stuff that we taught you today. So when you go home, you need to practice it. Repetition is the mother of all learning, which is true. It's just that there's no really great evidence that we should be taking it home and repeating it at home when we can repeat it at school the next day.
Okay, so you know how I feel about the researchy stuff, but, just give me a little bit of insight. What does the research actually tell us about homework and our kids' well-being?
How do you feel about the researchy stuff?
Oh, just tell me the real life stuff.
Well, science is the best way for us to know whether stuff is working or not. There's so many things that as a result of science, we know that we otherwise wouldn't. All these old wives' tales that have been disproven because good science says, if you change this, you actually discover whether or not it's really having an impact on stuff. So I don't think we can go poo-pooing science.
I'm not poo-pooing science. I just have to listen to it every day.
Okay, so you're tired of
I am tired of your tirades, but there is some important stuff and I do learn lots. So
when we look at the science around homework, there is, well, I don't know how to say it politely. There is not really any strong evidence from...
Not really? Or there isn't?
Well, there's no strong evidence from decades of research that homework on average is good for our kids. In fact, most of the research shows that it has either a neutral or a negative effect. Now, I say not really because it's really hard to research this and to do it well. And one of the main reasons is because there's all different kinds of homework. And so for me, it's as much about whether homework is given or not as what kind of homework is given. You see, some activities are going to be really, really good for our children's learning and for reinforcement and for consolidating, and some activities are just a waste of time. So on average, the scientific research shows, and has done now for about 30 years, maybe 35 years, that homework, again, I'm saying on average. Oh, and I've got to say another really important thing here. Homework on average for children up to around the age of 12, 13, 14. So essentially what I say is primary school has zero benefit Literally zero benefit for the average kid getting the average amount of homework and doing the average sort of stuff for homework. It's a waste of time. There's no evidence to support it. Once the kids are in high school, there is some evidence that up to an hour in the early years and then up to 2 hours in their later high school years does have it gives them advantage academically. So it's worth doing it once they're in high school. But for primary school kids, just stop.
Okay, so can you step me through what it is that you actually are really disgruntled about when it comes to homework? We're talking general terms here.
Yeah.
What the average school is working with in homework parameters. What is it that really, kind of gets under your skin?
Okay, so first of all, the average school has a directive that's been given by the education department in their state, and I think every state in Australia and every territory in Australia has this, that children have to have homework. A couple of years ago, Victoria ran a parliamentary inquiry into homework, and they didn't find any evidence to support the use of homework, at least in primary school. They're still doing it, by the way. They're still giving homework out, but the parliamentary inquiry couldn't even justify the use of homework, but the education department said, no, we've got to keep on making sure that kids are doing homework. There's a handful of rebel principals around Australia that have said, we're actually going to follow the evidence and the kids don't have to do it. And guess what? The kids are doing fine. Students doing all right. But if I was to list my grievances with homework, what I'll do, because I'm going to talk for way too long and get too carried away, I'm going to share the first couple, then we'll take a quick break and I'll share the rest of them and talk about what we should do as a result. So here we go. Number one, there's just no evidence to support it, especially in those primary school years. Full stop, end of story. If we're going to be science driven, we need to actually look at what the science says. And the science says it's pointless for kids who are in primary school, period.
So what about the parent who's got a child who's really struggling with their maths, for instance, and they decide to hire a tutor to come and help
Tutoring
them?
is a different process than homework. Okay, so if I'm going to put my children into a tutoring class, that means that they're going to be doing deliberate practice with a qualified trainer or teacher who is going to guide them and improve them. That's kind of like saying, I want my children to learn the piano, but I'm never going to ask them to do any practice. Okay. We need them to have a piano teacher so that teacher can help them to get better. So if I've got a child who is falling behind, I decide to put them into tutoring. That's a deliberate form of practice and teaching with a qualified instructor that's going to help them. That's totally different to, here's some homework, go home, fill in the homework matrix, fill in the 3 of the boxes in our grid. Make sure you finish this worksheet. Totally different kind of homework. Let's talk about the other reasons that I'm not a fan of homework in just a sec.
It's the Happy Families Podcast.
Are screens creating tension at home? Tweens, Teens and Screens is a webinar to guide families to healthy, safe super screen solutions. Buy it today at happyfamilies.com.au/shop.
The kids are back at school, after school activities are starting, and we are once again organising how to get our kids to and from it all. So has the old should I or shouldn't I give them a mobile phone debate begun in your head?
Well, Space Talk offers the perfect solution with their newly released Adventurer, a 4G smartphone watch. Designed especially for 5 to 12-year-olds, the new Adventurer watch features phone calls, SMS messaging, and GPS location updates, giving parents and kids a safe, age-appropriate way to stay connected.
Our 10-year-old has one and we love that she has it and she loves having one.
You can check out spacetalkwatch.com to find out how you can give yourself and your child the peace of mind that you're never far away.
It's the Happy Families Podcast, the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now. And today we're talking about a really hot-button topic, homework.
And I'm not sounding happy.
You're not happy. So we've already discussed that there is no research to support children under the age of 12, 13, even up to 14, actually getting any significant benefits out of doing homework.
Any academic benefit at all. In fact, it's neutral, if not negative, on average. Now, I've got a handful of other reasons that I'm anti-homework. I'm going to run through them pretty quickly.
Okay.
Number one, it adds to my workload as a parent.
Definitely.
Like I've got stuff going on.
And I know that when, I sit around with mums having a coffee, they feel really, really stretched by this often because...
But I talk to some mums and dads who will do a couple of hours of homework with their children after school and after work, and their kids are 8 years old.
Wow.
And you know what else? The reason it takes them 2 hours is because the parents don't know how to do the homework.
I think that's why you really don't like homework, isn't it? Because you don't know how to do it.
Every time my kids come home with a C, I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know how I ever got a PhD. It's really stressful for a lot of kids. No, I'm fine with children being uncomfortable, and I'm absolutely for children doing things that are hard and pushing themselves. So here's the thing. If you don't understand what happened in class, to come home and have to try to work it out without the teacher, that can be overwhelming for the majority of children. And it's not what education is meant to be about.
Well, especially when mum and dad try to teach you the archaic way of doing things because it was different.
Back in the 80s, back in the 90s, whatever it was when we were kids, I mean, I was a product of early 1980s primary schooling. And they do everything differently today than how they did it when I was a kid. So it's not fair for the children. It's also really hard on the parents. But the other thing is, and we've watched this with some of our kids, once they have got it figured out in class, coming home and repeating it, it's just boring. Like they sit there and they're so bored, and it really extinguishes that flame of curiosity when you're just doing boring stuff. Next thing, it adds to teachers' loads. I mean, I work in and around schools all the time now, and I am astounded at how hard teachers work compared to what they were doing back in the 80s. Not that I want to belittle what teachers did back then, but as a comparison, the expectation on teachers today is extraordinary compared to back then. And the last thing that they need to be worried about is whether or not homework got done or whether the dog ate it.
And I know that from experience when we've kind of, shared our views on homework and got a pardon for each of our children, you can see the relief in their faces. One less child they've got to worry about.
Yeah. So I think the last couple of reasons that I'm anti-homework creates conflict at home, because a child doesn't want to do it because they are feeling unmotivated or they are bored or they're struggling. And then the parents are like, you've got to do your homework. And next thing you know, there's this big conflict in the kitchen over whether or not the homework's going to get done. One of my biggest issues, though, is that homework leaves less time for the important stuff.
Yeah, I think that's where I really struggle with homework policy is just when my kids come home, I try so hard to be available to them. And yet I'm going to spend half my afternoon staring at paperwork.
Well, not in our house, thank you very much, Mrs. Happy Families. But let me just add something on this, though. If parents are going to let their kids just sit in front of video games and consume screens and do nothing, then I probably would rather that they were doing homework. I mean, that's what I would say about that, because I want children to be either having some good quality downtime or using their brains, being efficient, learning, growing, developing, doing something like that. That's what childhood is kind of for. But I don't think either of them are really good alternatives. I'd rather them be doing their art or their music or their drama or their sport or
handstands in the backyard.
Handstands, going for a swim, jumping on the trampoline, actually connecting with their family, riding the bike down the street to catch up with a friend. Those are the kinds of things that I want to see kids doing in the afternoon. Going to the grocery store with mum to buy the groceries for tonight. That's what I think is far more valuable. That's the important stuff that they could be doing, and sometimes homework gets in the way of that. And lastly, it's just so generally uninspiring. Like, golly, who wants to do it? So that's why I'm against it.
That's a really great list, and it's given me some food for thought. And I generally agree with everything that you're saying. In my experience, most of the homework that's coming home with our children takes them about 10 or 15 minutes. And I don't see the point of rocking the boat if it's really not adding angst to the overall running of my house.
Yeah, well, I guess I've kind of softened my attitude, even though I've gone on this great big rant today, because of two things. First of all, most of the time our kids have been happy to do it. Even though I'm telling them not to, they're like, hey, Dad, it's just easier if I do it. They actually sit down and we're like,
and they do. They feel ostracized, whether it be by their peers or their teachers at times when, even though they have been given that pardon to not do it. And so, yeah, I feel like it's really important that, we kind of run this through our own filters and work out what's going to work best for us and our children.
Yeah. In terms of rocking the boat, I think that if there's no evidence for something and it's causing distress, challenge and difficulty in the family, it's worth rocking the boat. It's worth saying.
And that if it was causing distress, then I would 100% rock the boat. But in most cases, our children have actually not been too worried whether they do it or not.
Now, I need to highlight a couple of things. First of all, the confession. I've definitely softened my stance. The reason is not only because some kids just like doing homework, but also we're talking about averages, right? So on average, it doesn't help. On average, it's actually neutral or even harmful. But not every child is average, which means that in some cases, homework might actually be helpful. And I do say this tentatively because I think any differences are probably going to be very, very small and they might come at substantial cost. But, sometimes homework can help. There are a couple of kinds of homework that I really do encourage.
Yes, I would love you to share that because they 100% are things that we support in our home and have made a significant difference in our children's education.
Number one, reading. You cannot read to your kids enough. You cannot get them to read to you enough. Reading. Of all of the things that we've talked about today, homework has no evidence to support it in primary school. But reading, I don't see reading as homework. I see reading as just what you do because humans read. We know how to read, and reading is good for our learning, and we love to read. We don't do it because it's homework. We don't fill in the reading wheel and say, I read for 20 minutes. We just read. And the research shows that the more our kids read, the better they're likely to do academically. That's the typical outcome. Reading is so strongly associated with great academic outcomes, with curiosity, with learning, with openness to new experiences, with conscientiousness. This is the number one thing that I would encourage parents to do.
And we love reading with our kids. It's one of the highlights of our days to just kind of cuddle up at the end of the night and read a book.
Second thing, projects. If the kids are interested in something, then turn on the computer and let them learn. Let them do projects. Let them create. Let them connect. Let them develop their understanding of stuff. There's loads of research that shows that when children are self-directed and autonomous in their learning, and they're learning about stuff that they actually care about, they're going to do better. And the third thing, I just reckon do stuff together. And when you're doing stuff, count or spell or read. Give the children an opportunity to run down the supermarket aisle and do something, do jobs and chores for you, clean up around the house, be involved in family life. I don't see that as homework, though. I see that as just living a whole and fulfilling childhood. So that's my homework spiel.
So the take-home message for today is there is no evidence that homework helps.
In primary school.
In primary school, yes. But one thing that does definitely make a huge difference to your children all round is reading.
Yep.
Reading and self-directed learning. And if you can tap into those areas, your child is just going to thrive.
Yeah, and hopefully if you decide that you want to talk to your children's teachers about it, you won't be rocking the boat too much. I think it's a worthwhile conversation because it's not great for our kids. If your kids are happy doing their homework, just leave them be. We really hope that you're happy listening to the podcast. If you are, we'd love your 5-star ratings and reviews at Apple Podcasts. Please let people know what you think of the podcast so other people can make their families happier and, hopefully stress-free in the afternoons as well. We appreciate Justin Rulon from Bridge Media for producing the podcast, and our executive producer is Craig Bruce. If you would like more information about how to make your family happier, you can find out all about Happy Families memberships at our website, happyfamilies.com.au.